So greetings, hello, welcome back. It's Thomas Stafford speaking again, and today I'm recording this on the 4th of July instead of Sunday, and I've saved this recording for this week for today, which is Thursday the 4th of July, because it's a very historic day. So I want to frame my remarks about Brexit and contemporary geopolitics of Europe and Britain and so on, and the world. I'm speaking as coordinator of the World Intellectual Forum here in Europe, and coordinator of Philosophers of Peace for many years, and also running my own Peace Institute that was set up at the University of London, as colleagues know. And I have many other hats, of course, as a poet and writer and philosopher, and as a Druid working for peace. So my remarks will, first of all, I'm going to talk about the importance of this day, 4th of July. So this day is really dedicated to liberty, historically. And in America, in the USA, there are lots of people celebrating today. It's called Independence Day. So I greet my American friends. I was born in Montreal, just up the road from New York. I remember going to New York as a baby and young child, and I've always loved the New World. I feel totally at home in America and Canada. I'm not so happy about contemporary American politics, so I first want to address what is America doing in the world? I noted that Chomsky recently gave a talk. He said the Republican Party is the most dangerous organisation on the planet. I admire Chomsky's work as an intellectual. He's welcome to join the World Intellectual Forum. We need people of his calibre. Yes, it is a pretty dangerous organisation, the Republican Party, as are all kind of monopolies of power. When you get vast amounts of money, vast amounts of blocking structures in place. I would say the Conservative Party in the UK is also very dangerous at the moment. But it's tragic because America was founded on the ideal of freedom, and today, Liberty Day, is supposed to be dedicated to the goddess Libertas, freedom, who was symbolised by the Liberty Cap, which people wore during the American Revolution. Thomas Paine apparently wrote a poem in honour of Liberty, the goddess. Thomas Paine was a Druid, a friend of William Blake and Nicolas Bonville in Paris. The 18th century, the Enlightenment, was a time of great intellectual fervour and a freeing from old moribund ideas. And the USA very much pioneered the way with its vision of liberty. That then caught on in Europe and the French Revolution, although it turned extreme, and I certainly would never have supported that Chaumette chap who organised the Reign of Terror. In the name of the Republic, he was anti-aristocrat, anti-everybody really. He was an extremist, so it went too far. Thank God the Americans didn't do that. And they created a country dedicated to freedom and the pursuit of happiness. So I want to remind my American cousins today what they actually stand for. Today should be Liberty Day for all of us. And if you read the American Declaration of Independence, which was voted and approved formally by the Continental Congress on the 4th of July 1776, this is what we're celebrating today, this document. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, and by extension women, of course, are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles, and organising its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. These are very profound words, and written by Thomas Jefferson, who's a thinker I greatly respect, who was international correspondent of the Lodge of the Nine Sisters, which was an enlightened lodge of intellectuals. It's been called the UNESCO of the 18th century. Many of the great thinkers of the Enlightenment belong to it. And the Nine Sisters are, of course, the Nine Muses. So I'm speaking from the the modern day Lodge of the Nine Sisters, so to speak, here in the Museum of the Muses. And Jefferson, what I think is so important about this document and this phrase, he says that all men are created equal, they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Philosophically, and I'm speaking as a philosopher, that's the most interesting bit of this text, because how is it that God, the creator, gives us these rights? That's what we should be talking about. There's nothing in this about you have to be of a certain race or religion or gender or sexuality or anything. No, just as a human soul, as a person, you're given these rights. I would say this is the ontological argument for the basis and foundation of law, jurisprudence, ethics, and justice. And all philosophers have been struggling with this. Thomas Jefferson never had time, he never really wrote a treatise on philosophy as such. He borrowed ideas from Montesquieu and other thinkers of the day, and he was too busy as a statesman. He became president. He didn't have time to sit down and do pure philosophy. Later, Hegel did. Hegel was a pure philosopher. He had time at the University of Berlin. He wrote out a treatise called The Philosophy of Right. He tried to work out how it is we're endowed with these rights. And I think he came pretty close to explaining the metaphysics. We're endowed with that right because we have consciousness. Unthinking beings, inanimate objects, lacking in self-consciousness, the ability to reflect, really have no ethics. They live in a pre-ethical state because they cannot imagine the impact of their actions on other people or other things. They're not self-aware, so they're not aware of others. You need to be able to imagine the impact of your thoughts, words, deeds on somebody else, to then realise, gosh, I'm not going to harm them because look, they're like me. Scientists, neurologists now talk about something called mirror neurons. This is a faculty of the human brain, actually, that enables us to visualise what it is to be someone else. It's the basis of all relationships, all friendships, and all love. I think there's evidence that people who are psychopathic, who are malevolent and criminal in thinking, literally lack certain brain structures. These mirror neurons become defective, and they literally cannot think what it's like to be someone else. So they have no kind of ethics. And that's very sad. And I hope scientists can work on a cure for these kind of deformities. But so to me, what Hegel was saying in his metaphysics is because we're descended, each of us, from Great Spirit, to use the Druid phrase, or the primal religious phrase, each of us is a droplet of divinity, as Sir George Trevelyan used to put it. So we have within us a sense of the whole and a sense of responsibility towards the whole. So we want to work for ourselves, for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but also for everyone else. I can't be happy if I know that my neighbour is starving to death. I will go and help feed them or give them a drink. That's the opposite of selfishness. And so really what we're talking about is how can we build a government structure that is unselfish, that is premised on the mutual recognition of mutual rights, that I have these rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but I also endow and support and cooperate with everyone else for their rights to pursue these same ends. And if a government starts getting in the way of that and blocking me and persecutes me for doing good, I mean, there's ridiculous things, legislation you see that people are being arrested now if you give food to a homeless person or you give shelter or accommodation. There are problems with homelessness in the UK. A friend of mine has a house that's largely empty and she wants to let homeless people stay there, but then she's taxed so much by the council that it's not possible because they're homeless and poor and unemployed, have no money, so they can't pay rent. And the minute she opens up and is generous, she gets clobbered. So it's as if we're legislating against altruism as a society. The same if somebody wants to run a kind of junk shop or charity shop. Free rent. Buildings are unused in the centres of towns. They should be available. We need an enabling society which rewards people for altruism, which rewards people for community spirit. At the moment, sometimes it's as if we have the opposite. And everything has become so hyper-legalised that to do anything good, you need like 40 lawyers to sign it off, and you have to pay 20 experts for their opinion before you can even like give a homeless person a sandwich. That's complete nonsense. We've ended up with a legalist society, which is not what Jefferson intended, and it's not what the framers of any civilized constitution intended. No, we have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, all of us. And if our governments are trying to block that, we have to change our governments. It's as simple as that. Okay, so I also want to comment again on the whole Brexit fiasco, because you see, to me, the European Union, for all its flaws, and it's got flaws and so on, is an enabling structure. It enables me to come and live here from Scotland, to come and live in France and enjoy the beauty of this region, and it enables me to travel freely to other countries in Europe and to teach and work. It enables my compatriots from other European countries to come and live in Scotland or Ireland or the UK or London. You know, I've lived and travelled in many different countries in my life, and as a bard and a druid and a writer and academic, I enjoy that freedom of movement. I want my daughters, my children, my grandchildren, my great-great-grandchildren to go on enjoying that freedom. We've struggled very hard as a continent after these tragic wars over the last 100 or 200 years to build a structure which provides enough security, enough common sort of cohabitation of the space of the European continent without threatening each other and without the need for militarism. So it's an attempt to demilitarize the continent, as I see it. And the founders of the European Union were great peace thinkers. They were visionaries. They wanted to create a structure that Europe would never again go to war, as we had done time and time and time again in history. And so they came up with this idea of the European Union, which was premised on the ideas of David Mitrani, who was what's called a functionalist in terms of international relations. He worked at the Princeton Institute of Advanced Studies. When Einstein was working there on advanced physics, he was working there on advanced political science. He came up with this idea of functionalism, which the founders of the European Union then said, that's a good idea, we'll do that. And, look him up. So I just want to celebrate the fact that we've had these recent elections in the European Union. I'm pleased that the United Kingdom took part in it against the will of the extremists that are trying to get the UK out of the European Union, which I think is under false pretences and through all kinds of ridiculous skullduggery against my right to pursue life, liberty and happiness. And the vast majority of the British people, 64% of the voters of the United Kingdom did not vote for Brexit. 64% of them, they either abstained, which means, I'm not voting for this nonsense, or they voted actively against Brexit. 28% of the people of the UK voted actively against, 38% voted actively against Brexit, and only about 40% voted for it. And then a large number abstained. So there's no mandate for it, as I've said before. Philosophically, it's a minority, obsession. And any rational examination of the matter will show that it's completely based on false premises, fake. I'm a fully trained philosopher and intellectual historian, and I cannot say to my compatriots again and again enough that this is a very dangerous thing, which, these Brexiteers are pursuing, and they really do seem to me to be fanatics and very ill-educated. I was very disturbed to see when the Brexit Party went to the European Union Parliament, just opened a couple of days ago. What did they do? But when Beethoven's anthem is playing, the Ode to Joy, everyone stands up as a matter of courtesy. And this small little group, what they do is they turn their backs on the Speaker of Parliament and faced out. This to me is a disgraceful gesture. Those people, I think, should be disciplined. There should be rules about behaviour in the European Parliament. People shouldn't be allowed to be disrespectful in this way. And then I researched it more, and I discovered that exactly the same gesture was done in the Weimar Republic, in the Reichstag, by the Nazi Party, when at a certain point in the proceedings, I think it was in 1930 something, a group of Nazi MPs did exactly the same gesture. So these Brexit people were copying consciously a Nazi gesture. Well, I find that disgraceful. You know, that's not the Europe I voted for. It's not the party I voted for. And I've said before that, you know, it's a very disturbing day when we have such extremists in our parliament. But the only way to meet them is through rationalism. I don't think we should ratchet up, you know, counter movements and take to marching on the streets and so on. Although there is going to be a big march on July the 20th, which is coming up soon in London, and I hope 1 million or 2 people will come and demonstrate their support for Europe, because we are Europe. It's our freedom of speech, it's our rights here that are at threat. And I also celebrate the fact that we've now selected, through a sort of complex process, some new leaders for the European Union. And we have, it's quite interesting because we have someone from Germany, from Spain, from France, from Belgium, and from Italy in now senior posts. This is how Europe, at its best, is a patchwork of different nations. So we have the new parliamentary leader is going to be this man, David Sassoli, who's a left-wing Italian. He's going to be, I think, the head of the European Parliament. We have Christine Lagarde, who's French, who is going to be the person with the terrible, difficult job of steadying the euro and the finances, and good luck to her. Joseph Borrell, who's a socialist from Spain, will be the new foreign minister, and you know, good luck to him, because that's a very important mandate, and hopefully he's going to work flat out for peace. I still think the European Union should have a mediation service, so I will be corresponding with him, as I have done with previous foreign ministers. And then we have Charles Michel, who's a liberal Belgian Prime Minister, who's taking over from Donald Tusk as the head of the European Council, President. And finally we have a German, Ursula von der Leyen, who's going to be the European Commission President, who runs the commissioners and has a duty to come up with policy and so on, that's then discussed by the Parliament. And good luck to her. She's obviously an intellectual, and she did her degree partly at the London School of Economics, where I studied partly, a great academic institution at the University of London. So she's obviously a very clever woman, and you know, hopefully one can work with people of this calibre to create a Europe of stability and peace. My mission is to ensure that the British people, such as myself, do our bit in stabilising and ensuring that Europe, you know, continues our mission of peace. We've had enough world wars, thank you. We don't want any more. And I'll be talking at the end a little bit about the Middle East and Iran, and why we in Europe should be doing what we can to prevent any Third World War happening. I also want to celebrate the fact that yesterday was St. Thomas's Day, my patron saint. I'm one of many, many people called Thomas who've been intellectuals over the centuries. I've written a book called The Book of Thomases, which lists you know, over 2,000 of them. And I've been researching this for about 20 years because I kept finding Thomases, like Thomas Jefferson, the guy that wrote the Declaration of Independence. You know, these are thinkers. There's never been a Pope Thomas or a King Thomas in history. And I find that interesting because Thomas was the most Gnostic of the disciples. He was close friends with Mary Magdalene and John. And if you read the Gospel of John, which is the most esoteric of the Orthodox Gospels, you know, I think it was written by St. John. And I think that he was a close friend of Thomas and of Mary Magdalene. And if you read it properly, you know, that jumps out of the text. I've done a commentary on these texts, and I've explored all this. And also on the Gospel of Thomas and on the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which are far more Gnostic Gospels than the Orthodox kind of just have faith and everything will be revealed. No, you need knowledge as well as faith. So as Giles Quispel said, great Dutch scholar of religions, He said Gnosticism is the other branch of the European Christian heritage. We have Catholicism, we have Protestantism, Orthodoxy, but the fourth one is Gnosticism, which is transcendental and earlier to those three. Before there were Catholics, Protestants and Orthodox, there were the real original Christians, and we can only call them Gnostics. It simply means the people that know, or the people that are on the path, or the people that are searching for enlightenment. That's what Jesus was teaching, that's what his disciples were all about. So yesterday we celebrated that, and it's the time in the calendar when we celebrate that gnosis bursting through into history. I was delighted to go to my local town in France here, Boussac, and see on the sign, which is run by the local mayor's office, there was a sign saying hello to all the Thomases in French, bonjour à tous les Thomas, which is such a sweet thing. You know, that they actually, like, A, know when these saints are having their festivals, and B, they put it actually out there as a sign that flashed up in lights on the city centre sign. So thank you very much, and on behalf of all the Thomases, you know, thank you to the French people for keeping faith with intellect and with the power of the mind, which France has done. It's been a haven for intellectuals ever since Thomas à Becket took refuge here from the thugs at the court of Henry II, who eventually killed him when he went back. And Thomas More is another great intellectual who spoke up against secular power taking over too much control. You know, it's fine to have a balance between secular power, legal authority, and spiritual authority, but at the end of the day, the spiritual authority, I think, has to have the precedence, because that's where we're endowed with our rights, as Thomas Jefferson pointed out. I'm also working, as people know, on creating the Centre for Bremain Studies, which is going to be the first academic centre to actually look at this whole maelstrom of Brexit nonsense, and its converse, Bremain, which is a term I use, and also others do, to describe the opposite of Brexit. It means Britain remaining in the European Union and helping reform it and change it for the better, working with people like Yanis Varoufakis and other great European thinkers who say, look, we can make it better. We need to work for like a social security system for all Europeans. We want to work for a Green New Deal that we fund, renewable energy, we fund transport systems that are non-polluting. I would like to see CERN, the great Centre for Advanced Science near Geneva, I'd like to see CERN have a huge new branch for alternative energy creation. I'd like to see them exploring gravity waves, zero-point energy, exploring alternatives to nuclear energy, because nuclear energy is past its sell-by date. It's dangerous. It pollutes. Look at the photographs of people in what used to be the former centre of the Soviet Union, deformed because of all the testing that was done. You know, nuclear energy should be kept inside the atom, not released, right? But there are other forms of energy we should be exploring. And as a great lover of Newton, the discoverer of gravitational laws, I personally believe that CERN should be doing a huge amount of research on gravity as a potential energy source, with the University of Glasgow, for instance, which has one of the most important gravitational research centres in the world, and with other colleagues like in Japan and other scientific research institutes. I'm so pleased the European Union has just signed a trade treaty with Japan and now with Latin America. So that's something that we should be doing, remaining in the European Union, but using our combined intellectual capital to solve the environmental and economic and political problems of our time, not breaking up and splitting up our societies. Okay, I also want to say that today, very interestingly, as it happens, is also the day on which the Communist Manifesto was published by Marx and Engels in 1848. And the Manifesto of the Communist Party in 1848 was published on the same day as the Declaration of Independence or Liberty. Is it a coincidence, or did Marx and Engels know and plan it that way? I don't know. I asked the question. What I would say is that it's symbolically important because just as the Declaration of Independence in 1776 promised, freedom and life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness for everyone, of course it didn't actually deliver that. Because, for instance, of the people that signed that, I think 40 of them were slave owners, for instance. They were owning hundreds of slaves. America was a society that condoned slavery at that time. So, whereas Marx, when he published his work, the Communist Manifesto in 1848, things had moved on, history had moved on. We'd had the whole liberal intelligentsia working away since 1776, and realising that slavery and progress are not compatible. So it was the British Empire that abolished slavery in 1832 under the Liberal government of the day, reforming government. The same people that founded my university at the University of London, many of them, were active in that government, Lord Brougham and others. And they were inspired by Jeremy Bentham, who founded University College. And these were great thinkers who were working, how can we emancipate all humanity? They wanted equal rights for women and, the disallowing of property restrictions on the vote and so on. Gradually, during the course of the 19th century, these liberal reforms were brought in the UK, and constitutional reforms. But Marx wanted even more. He said, look, as long as the current economic system remains of capitalism, in which profit and egotism and selfishness are the driving force of our activities, we're not going to get freedom for everyone. In fact, we're going to get continual slavery. And he published Das Kapital in 1867, which I'm doing a commentary on, in which he pointed out the entrapment that capital creates. And even today, in 2019, people are trapped by debt. People are trapped in fear through debt. Although we're a sophisticated digital economy and everyone, does complicated work and so on, we're all just wage slaves still, paying off debts to the big faceless capital owners of the vast wealth of the planet, which is in very few hands. This is very bizarre. If Chomsky were here in the room, we could talk about it, and he could try and explain it. It's like there's a deep, as he said with language, there's surface grammar, and then there's a deep universal grammar. It's as if capital is the kind of, there's a surface level of what capital is, and then there's the deep structure. And the deep structure seems to be fairly malevolent, in that it's accumulated in smaller and smaller hands, who then empower and have power over everyone else. So, for instance, read the Communist Manifesto, don't take it from my word, today is the day we celebrate it. Interesting statement, he says the charges against communism, made from a religious, a philosophical, and generally from an ideological stand, are not deserving of serious examination. Does it require deep intuition to comprehend that man's ideas, views, and conceptions, in one word, man's consciousness, changes with every change in the conditions of his material existence, in his social relations and in his social life? What else does the history of ideas prove than that intellectual production changes its character in proportion as material production has changed? The ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of its ruling class. End of quote, Well, discuss. The thing is, of course, if I was living in Athens in the 4th century BC, I wouldn't be recording a video. The technology wouldn't be there. I'd be speaking and somebody would be taking notes, writing it on a scroll. I don't agree with Marx that the ideas that I'm coming up with, freedom, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, change just because I'm changing the medium of discourse. No, I'm more of an eternalist than Marx. And I'm a believer in what Thomas Jefferson calls the creator who endows us with rights. I love Marx and Engels. They were very clever and amazing people, but I think they were intellectually wrong, much as I love them. And as an intellectual historian, I've studied them in great detail and taught them, and can explain why I think they were wrong. There isn't time to go into that. But fundamentally they were wrong because they didn't study religious studies. They were completely ignorant when it came to theology. Although, you know, Marx studied in Germany at a time when theology was really taking off, it was amazing. He had no real interest in it. He never studied it. Either Jewish theology or Christian or some of the more Gnostic stuff that was being discovered at the time. There were people at the University of Berlin at the time Marx was there who were pioneering Hermetic studies. They were working on the Gnostic roots of Christianity and Hermeticism. They'd found things like the Book of Enoch and were commenting on it. None of that, Marx didn't know a thing about that. Hegel did, and Hegel was a master of comparative universal philosophy and spirituality. I've drawn up this periodic table of the world's religious and philosophical traditions, you know, in that spirit, as Hegel would have done. If he'd have been alive, he would have said, look, we've got to study the whole thing here. And Marx didn't have as big enough mind to really realise that. He had one idea. Everything's determined by the material conditions. That's it. End of story. Well, it's not true, my dear friend. It's much more complicated. History is dialectical. It's the interaction of spirit and matter that makes society, that makes life, that makes language possible, that makes thought possible. It's the inalienable rights from the creator, but also the rights of the environment, of the ecosphere, of matter, of the vegetable animal kingdoms. You know, they have rights too, because we live in a kind of ecosystem which includes the spiritual and supernatural realms. Now, so what I'm thinking is that, thank you very much, Marx and Engels, we celebrate your manifesto today, just as we celebrate the Declaration of Independence, but we need an update on both of them. Neither of them are sufficient now. Yes, we need to end slavery, but we need to end the subtle forms of slavery that are affecting the planet now, which is slavery to false ideologies, slavery to fear, to, above all, slavery to militarism. And one of the things that I am disappointed about Marx and Marxism is that Marx, in his whole Das Kapital, you know, he discovers and explores the rules. He never talks about war. It's such a blindingly obvious error. If I was marking Das Kapital, you know, I'd give him a C- and say, go back and write the chapter on war and militarism. Was the guy blind? Didn't he realise that most of the technological process that he describes, the mechanisation of industry and so on, is fuelled by militarism. The inventions of guns and machine guns and rifles and rockets and bombs and tanks, this is what's pushing industrialisation and mechanisation. And it's true up to our age with the digitalisation of the economy. The internet was an invention of the military-industrial intelligence complex and still is. These guys are pushing the frontiers of technology. My complaint about that, and I'm adding the missing bit that Marx didn't write, and saying that we have to use these for peace, or it's curtains for humanity. You don't have to be a prophet to work that out, right? We're misusing our technological abilities. We're investing vast amounts, trillions. The American people have invested since 9/11 in so-called security in the Middle East, in buying not just physical weapons and selling them to states like Saudi Arabia, client states, Israel, but also investing in internet technology and espionage. I mean, it's a vast money spinner for people that work in Washington DC at the NSA. But it's all a fake industry. It's not investing in people and wisdom. It's not investing in love, which is what John, Thomas, Mary Magdalene and Christ would say. The only way to buy peace and security